Okay, so we're going to work the rest of this worksheet, or the next part of this worksheet is still the absolute values, the absolute value functions. We're still finding the x and y intercepts of the following function. So this is part 2. Part 1 was the beginning of this. So even though it's f of x, I'm going to change f of x to 0, and then I'm going to have 4 times x minus 3 plus 4. So since it has something with it, and I want to solve for the absolute value, first thing I've got to do is get that absolute value by itself. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides, which gives me negative 4 equals 4 times the absolute value of x minus 3. And this is 4 times the absolute value, so I can divide both sides by 4. So negative 1 equals the absolute value of x minus 3. So this function that we start with is actually what you would use to graph the equation, or graph the absolute value function. It's the equation for the graph. But if I want to know where the x-intercepts are, then I've got to solve it down to where I get the absolute value. So I'm going to start out with x minus 3 equals negative 1, because that's what it is down here. I'm just dropping the absolute value bars. But I've also got to have, since this one's negative, I've got to have a positive. So I'm going to set it equal to positive 1. And then just like I did in the first video, I'm going to add to both sides, and x equals 2. I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and x equals 4. So my x-intercepts are 2 and 0 and 4 and 0. And since they're intercepts, we have to write them as an ordered pair. I didn't leave myself enough room. All right, to find the y-intercept, we're going to set x equal to 0. So anytime you want to find a y-intercept, you always set your x equal to 0. So I'm going to go back to my original function and have 4 times 0 minus 3 plus 4. And then just solve for the answer. Just do the math. So 0 minus 3 would give me negative 3 plus 4, and I'm going to run out of room, so I'm going to go this way. The absolute value of negative 3 is positive 3 plus the 4. 4 times 3 is 12 plus 4. That gives me 16. So my y-intercept is 0 and 16. I'll draw that little line so we don't get confused later. Alright, so we're going to do the exact same thing for example 4. I'm going to set my function to 0. And I'm going to do negative 3 times the absolute value of x minus 2 minus 1. Again, I've got to get the absolute value by itself first, so I'm going to add 1. So 1 equals negative 3 times the absolute value of x minus 2. I'm going to divide by negative 3. So negative 1/3 equals the absolute value of x minus 2. So again, to find the x-intercepts, I'm going to use the x minus 2, set it equal to the negative 1/3. I'm going to go ahead and work that real quick. So I'm going to add 2. If I put this in my calculator, or if I do it by hand, I'm going to have negative 1/3 plus 2 over 1. Common denominator 3. So negative 1/3, 2 times 3 is 6 over 3. So that gives me 5/3. I don't care if you do that part on the calculator. And then I have x minus 2 equals a positive 1/3. This one was negative, this next one has to be positive. I'm going to add 2. So x is going to equal 7/3. So my x-intercepts are 5/3 and 0 and 7/3 and 0. And the y-intercept, again, I'm setting x equal to 0. So I have f of x equals -3, 0 minus 2, minus 1, because I always go back to my original function. So -3, 0 minus 2 gives me a -2 minus 1. The absolute value of -2 is +2. -3 times 2 is -6 minus 1, which gives me -7. So my y-intercept is 0 and -7. Let's squeeze that one in, but I think we're okay. Now 5 and 6 are done the exact same way, so I'm going to let you work them on your own, and I'll post an answer key. Or I'll work these out and post it on Canvas always. So this is the end of part 2.